Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. At this show today we have two very important stories to look into and of course we will explore them with our analysts and experts on the studio. First of all, of course, we have the situation in Afghanistan concerning women's situation. We understand that since the Taliban took over power in Afghanistan, this has been a major concern and quite an expectation from the international community as well as women inside Afghanistan. We know that unfortunately since the Taliban have taken power, they have not been able to fulfill the promises they have made earlier on, and the access of education to women still remains limited. There are also other restrictions that keep on coming up, specifically from the Ministry of Virtue and Vice, and we see that there are travel restrictions on women working, on television broadcasts, and of course, in general, women protests with regards to their right, specifically with their access to education. Just recently, we also know that Taliban forces have also used pepper spray at a group of women protesters. Along with this, of course, all of the other restrictions also remain in place, and whether or not the Taliban regime can actually fulfill their commitments that they said earlier on, or in fact talk about increasing the kind of women role that we see specifically compared to the last time that they came into power, where are we actually going to see a real shift, a real change in the way that women are now being given space in the country? That of course remains to be seen, and what really can be done with regards to that and the realistic expectation that one should have from the Taliban regime. We'll explore all of that in further detail. We will also take a look at the situation in India. Of course, the situation in India keeps on deteriorating. We keep on seeing many incidences of discrimination, of influential leaders talking about violence, of discrimination against not just Muslims but other minorities as well, and of course outright violence as well against these communities. And this again has no bounds. Just recently we saw that there has been an app that auctions Muslim women online, and a lot of derogatory comments also accompany this auction, and that of course the kind of extent to which the people in India have fallen down to with regards to how they're going to treat a person, a woman of belonging to a certain race, to a certain religion. All of that goes to say a long way about what the regime currently in India actually stands for. Along with that, we also know that there seems to be a slight demarcation in the way that the Indian population and the extremists look at the situation. There is a debate going on against Strats versus Raitas. What exactly is the difference between the two? What sort of statements are coming out? What does each of these segments believe in? And what's the difference between the two, if any? And what exactly does this fault line entail in terms of how we see the extremist and Hindutva ideology spreading in the Modi regime and the impact that it's going to have? All of these issues will be discussed in today's show with, of course, Mr. Farrukh Pitafi and Mr. Raja Faisal with us in the studios. Welcome, gentlemen. We have also been joined online by our experts. For our situation in Afghanistan, especially with regards to women, we have been joined by Shafiq Ahmed, who's a senior journalist, and Sumaira Khan, who's an Afghan affairs analyst. We're going to be joined by Ms. Sumaira soon as well. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Shafiq. With regards to how we see the current scenario and the kind of restrictions we see that keep on coming up again and again and again, we see that a lot perhaps is different as to what the initial statement was or what the initial expectation was from the Taliban regime, and what the international community perhaps may have had in mind. The kind of restrictions and measures that we now see the Taliban regime taking with regards to women in the country, is this something that was certainly expected, is actually within the limits of the extent that the Taliban regime will ever allow the women to take up space in Afghanistan, or is it actually a step back from what they first started off with?
If you're asking me, yes. Let me respond.
Yes, Mr. Shafiq.
Yes. It was a little bit expected because Taliban, we have seen the regime of Taliban between 1996 and 2001. So it was a little bit expected from the Taliban that there will be somehow some restriction on the women jobs and women's education. Though the Taliban time and again rejected all these reports that they are allowing the women to work, and they will definitely allow the women, the girls' education in the country. But what we have seen so far, the promise of providing education to the girls, it has not been fulfilled. Uh, uh, they made a promise, but so far, the primary level girls, they are going to their school, but from seven from seven onward, the girls institutions are not yet open. So this is definitely unfortunate. Regarding the jobs concern, what we have seen, jobs, women are going to their jobs. In fact, I have seen myself in Kabul, but those who are necessarily required in the job, in fact, they are not allowing the women where men are required to do the job, so they prefer the man, not the woman. But women are still working in some places where women are necessary, like paramedics, like doctors, like at the airport. So I have seen them; they are working. So this is a little bit tricky, but I personally believe all of these issues are basically linked to the economic situation in the country because the money has been freezed by the US, and they don't have a money to function the government. So they are facing a lot of problems currently. So talking
But
about
Mr. Shafiq,
education.
at the same time, we see that the schools perhaps are open for boys per se, and when we talk about the economic situation, that is perhaps impacting both genders the same way.
I think it is affecting the entire country. I personally believe when the factories are shutting down their units, 2 days back there was a press conference in Kabul, and half of the factories and industries are closed down. They cannot import goods because Afghanistan is more trading country. There is no money in the banks. There is restriction of withdrawal of the money, and nobody is submitting money or depositing money in the banks. So the banking system is not functioning. So how would they pay salaries to the teachers? Still, there is an issue of payment to their salaries, salary issues. Those teachers who are going to their schools or in colleges, the teachers, they are not getting their salaries in time, though Taliban distributed some of them, but still they are facing a severe economic crisis.
Right.
But what I have
Okay.
seen,
Let's also talk about when we talk about the situation and the kind of restrictions that keep on coming up. Farrukh, the fear whenever when the Taliban regime actually came into power this time around was that that the situation that was there the last time around is what it's going to be like, especially for the women. Can the Taliban really afford the kind of restriction that they imposed the previous time around again, and can that actually be expected of the way that they want to be recognized and have a say in the international community?
Right. I think they cannot. And let's be honest, Sana, I'm trying to keep an open mind because when we talk about Afghanistan, on one side is, of course, these concerns about humanitarian aspects. But then there is this, as was pointed out by Shafiq Saab as well, this unfolding economic crisis. You must have seen the editorial by New York Times that actually says don't punish the innocent Afghans for the deeds of Afghan government or whatever is regime is there. But regarding overall situation when it comes to the girls' education, remember, I keep on reminding everybody that being a father of two girls, I'm always worried about this aspect, which is very important because what happens in Afghanistan has a cultural impact on Pakistan as well. So there are two ways to look at what is happening in Afghanistan. One is a cynical aspect. The other one is more charitable one. The cynical first, and the argument that now they have announced that by the middle or end of March they are going to open the schools for girls across all levels. That actually speaks to the fact that recently there was an OIC not summit, but a very important meeting, and there it was committed that they are going to release funds, first collect funds and then transfer them to Afghanistan by the end of first quarter. So it actually links to that. They have to actually start cleaning up the act because then the monies will start flowing in. This is the cynical view.
Okay.
The charitable view is also very important. When Afghan Taliban actually took over, actually before that, when they were negotiating with the US, at that time we knew what their value system is. So they had actually committed that they are going to let women and girls go to school, education and work, provided the value system of parda is enforced. So far the schools that they have don't have provision for segregated education of girls. So right now they are going to actually, yes, I knew that here you are going to agree with me. But regarding the segregation, it is hoped that by the end of March they are going to create that kind of segregation and then the education will start. In any case, let us hope that the Afghan Taliban walk the talk, because whatever delay has happened and the sanctions we see, they were totally unnecessary. And this humanitarian crisis would not have been there had they delivered on their commitments earlier.
So just let me just get this correct. So are you saying that this is because perhaps this time around the Taliban are actually going to fulfill the commitment that they made, or is it because of the potential aspect of money coming into the country?
I'm just giving you two pictures,
okay, either
right?
way. Okay.
But my take is that the reality lies somewhere in between the two.
Okay.
I think that, of course, there is an economic crisis and they want to address it, but simultaneously they have made commitments and they are going to try to deliver it, but they didn't have the kind of critical infrastructure. Now they are trying to build it.
All right, Faisal, when we see the increase or perhaps the progress that the Taliban regime is trying to make in terms of actually making space and going ahead with the kind of commitments that they've made earlier on, do you think that the current restrictions that perhaps they've put on the movement of women, or for example in television broadcasts, or not allowing certain workplaces to have women on board, is that something that is this contrary, or is perhaps also part of the fact that these are some of the limitations that are going to exist regardless of the progress they make?
Sana, first of all, let me tell you, I think today's Taliban, I understand that I have been claiming that today's Taliban are different Taliban from the previous ones. I still agree to it and I still commit to it. But to me, I think the top leadership of Taliban, it's a different one. But if we look at the lower cadres of Taliban, they are the simply same traditionalists that we used to have long ago. And why? Because I think when as they say, everything is fair in love and war. While it was war, everything was fair then. But now, when the war is over, now, of course, they need to change themselves. And if we talk about the top leadership wants women education, top leadership wants women empowerment, top leadership wants education to be the key within Afghanistan. But when it comes to, as Shafiq Saab earlier mentioned, and he rightly pointed out, as I know that Shafiq Saab being in Turkey, working for a premier news agency, he is looking after Afghanistan and he's daily in touch with people there within Taliban as well. And I know that. I learn a lot from him. And why I say this, he knows that there is money problem. The money is the key. If today Taliban had money to run government affairs, run their own Talibans underneath them, they are not paying the ones who are at the lower cadres.
Right.
Of course, they are not in a position to tell anything to them. And the day when they become in a position to tell something to them or to talk to them that this is what is better for us, I think that's when we will see the things changing.
All right, let me also include Sumaira Khan, who's an Afghan affairs analyst, also in the debate. She's joined us online. Thank you very much, Ms. Sumaira, for joining us and taking the time out. You've, of course, also been to Afghanistan often and have seen the situation, perhaps have a better idea as a woman also as to what has been going on in the past and what the current situation actually is for the women in the country. Of course, there's a lot of talk about access to education, and that's an important factor for sure. But perhaps another important aspect is also gender-based violence, which seems to be increasing, and the kind of protection that actually existed for it in Afghanistan is actually under a threat at the moment. What sort of measures do you think need to be taken to also protect women from that, considering perhaps maybe the sense of entitlement actually exists there, which is going to be hard one to take down?
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'll start with the last point you just mentioned. And since fall of Kabul, I was there, and it's a multi-pronged discussion for me, because just discussing Afghan women is probably, it has many branches that we need to first understand from the lenses of culture, their tradition, the way of their latest living in the previous regime. Now the regime is entirely different from, altogether different from the previous one. And the previous one was built up, taking 20 long years. They raised an entire generation, and indeed it's different from the one that we were having back in 2006 when the Taliban took over Kabul in their first regime. So I think discussing that would take a lot of time, but I'll quickly draw your attention towards in the Vogue tradition when we talk about Afghan women. Afghan women, they are very complicated. They are not easygoing. They have different challenges. You just saw yesterday that a group of Tajik girls, they set ablaze the traditional piece of cloth that we I'm Pakhtun. I call it chadar or padune, and we title it with different names. But they set ablaze that chadar, that dupatta and burqa that is largely can be seen in the tribal belt of Pakistan and 85% of Afghanistan. The women of Afghanistan, they use that shuttlecock burqa, and they simply barged into the streets of Kabul and they set it ablaze. So right now, as I mentioned, that it's a very critical and very complicated situation, and there are different lenses why we are unable to figure it out, that what should be the scene for women rights in Afghanistan. Why? Because
Sorry to
there is
cut you,
one
but let me
Western.
ask you a follow-up question. While we are talking about what is going on in Afghanistan, are we not somehow justifying the suffering of the victim in the name of culture?
No, I think it's not. As I told you, that it's a multi-pronged discussion. And since I was there, and I was not just there for first time, I've been visiting Afghanistan for almost 2 decades. It's been 18 years that I'm in journalism career, and I visited Afghanistan. Being myself is a Pakhtun, so I know what is the challenge right now. I told you already. There are two different dimensions when we talk about Afghan women. One is ultra modern, and one is an Afghan woman from the rural area that constitutes almost 85% of the Afghanistan. So there is not just women rights or women right violation scenario in Afghanistan. The scenario is being generated falsely, or you can say cosmetically, or you can say it's being fabricated to a larger extent, that yes, women's rights are being violated.
Correct me, Sumera, if I'm wrong. Girls are going to school or not?
See, this is something, it's not a question of saying yes or no. Probably I'm not responding to an MCQ if I'm not wrong. So we can't take an answer in
No, I
yes
was
or
not
no.
asking you
There is a
to tell
situation
me yes or
lying,
no.
and
My
situation is
concern
not
is
lying
that
over.
if girls are not going to school, how can we say that they are modern people and who are actually not part of the culture? I mean, a 12-year-old is a young girl
I'll
who is
respond to that if
entitled
you
to
allow.
go to school.
I'll respond to that if you allow, very respectively. If you are sending your girls to school and there is a dire security situation in the entire Afghanistan, we saw ISISK conducting their activities very easily, and we were seeing that even Taliban's first they were claiming that it's just a headache, it's not a menace for us anymore. We can tackle it very
But
easily,
sons are
but
going
they
to
were
school,
not.
right?
They were not
But sons
able
are going
to
to school.
overcome. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sons
saying
are
that the
going
boys
to
still are.
school. You are talking about law and order situation, and I get it. I mean, we have been through that as well. My question is, if sons can go, what law and order situation exists that girls cannot go to school?
Probably they are extra,
That
protected towards.
you basically probably the voice is echoing or what, I'm not getting it, it's interrupting.
Okay.
But let me clarify it for you even further,
I need to
that
ask.
The entire world is right now watching Taliban, how they are treating their women. Am I right?
Yeah.
Right. So,
And
absolutely.
after women, it's the journalist fraternity. That world is being a watchdog on Taliban right now. So
Right. Our
these
only
two
concern,
sections are
yes,
primarily
yes, Sumaira. The only
primarily.
concern that we were saying was that, of course, when there can be ease made for the boys and the men in Afghanistan, perhaps that the same can be extended for the women as well. Faisal, you had a question for
Yeah,
Mr. Shafiq?
Shafiq Saab, as we were earlier talking about torching the burqa or chadar in Kabul, and Sumaira rightly pointed out that obviously a group of Tajik women, she categorically said that Tajik women. So I got the impression that there is someone who is actually pushing a group of women just to tarnish or just to hit the Pashtun culture, Pashtun majority culture, which is of Afghanistan. Don't you think that somebody out there wants to create a fuss and wants to create an issue in which the ethnic minorities, they are at the hit, and of course the majority, which is of Pashtun, that of Taliban are a sort of a Pashtun majority. So don't you think that it is going to be an issue in coming days, and the culture of Pashtuns was the target of it?
Let me, Raja Faisal Sab, let me tell you what is my observation. I talked to many people. I mean, the Western power, they had a plan to divide the Afghan society on ethnic lines. Like whatever US has done in Libya, Iraq, Syria, in all these countries, you will find that countries are divided. They also tried there in Afghanistan to divide the society on the ethnic line. But it did not happen. Like when you talk to the Taliban, they will say Taliban are not only Pashtun. They say no. They are not talking only on Pashtun Wali or Pashtun. They say it is the Afghanistan Taliban, which comprise many ethnic groups. So the West tried, but it failed. Regarding the question, like some certain groups, they are trying to create a fuss in the country. Yes, I do believe. The reason is that around 1 million people, they are moved to Europe. In different countries they are living, and they are actually using the social media and pushing the Western world not to release the fund. So the question is that 1 million people versus 39 million innocent people. I mean, this is, I'm sorry, the figure of 1 million abroad may be incorrect, but somebody was quoting today in a television, because there was a rally today in Afghanistan. The rally was organized by women only, and they were requesting the US authorities to please unfreeze the fund of Afghanistan, which belongs to the people of Afghanistan. It doesn't belong to the Taliban, and the money will go to the banks. It will not go to the pocket of Taliban. So there was a rally, but there is a certain group. What I have observed? Yes, there is a certain moderate class, and somehow they have some links with the NGOs. Unfortunately, they are pushing something to carry on such kind of protests. There was a protest, in fact, but usually a very small number of women take part in such protest demonstration. But as for the problem, the core problem of Afghanistan is the money. They don't have money at all. If you are the banks are telling to withdraw
Absolutely.
just
Thank you
200
so
US
much, Mr.
dollars.
Shafiq Ahmed. Thank you so much for your time and your input, and thank you so much, Ms. Samara, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Of course, a lot of what the Taliban regime actually needs to do is there with regards to the kind of measures that are going to be extended for both boys and girls in the country. And then, of course, the economic situation also has a huge impact to play. But regardless of that, the way that actually trickles down to different genders is what is going to be more important. And speaking of women, we know that, of course, the situation with regards to the kind of treatment that women are met is not just limited to how the women in Afghanistan are treated. We see that all over the world, and perhaps a situation that is probably the worst example is that of the women that are being treated in India. We've just recently seen that there has been an auction online app, and this is not something new. Something similar also came out previously as well with regards to how specifically Muslim women were being treated online. But what something that has emerged is the fault line that exists between different extremist groups with reference to Trads and Raitas. And this is what we're going to explore further, what exactly this fault line is. We're also going to be joined very soon by senior analyst Mr. Hamid Khan, and we're welcoming him on the show as well. But before that, Farrukh, why don't you try and help all of us understand what exactly is the demarcation between Trads and Raitas?
Right. You will allow me also, Sana, to actually talk a little bit about the apps that you were talking about earlier, right?
Sure.
There's an app was launched that was called Sulli Bai. Right, and Sulli is actually a derogatory term for Muslim women, right? And then later on, because it was banned, there was an outcry. Then they went for another one very close to that, Bully Bai, right? And they kept on actually auctioning the women, Muslim women's pictures. And the implication was that these are very articulate, open-minded, in-your-face Muslim women. So embarrass them, bring them under pressure, that will force them to actually shut up. And finally, of course, because there is this auction that is going on, there is always the fear that tomorrow, day after tomorrow, when they go in public, they can be attacked as well. So the setting up as targets, this was the idea behind the whole thing. There was a crackdown recently, and we were astonished that first time there was some kind of follow-up, because last time there wasn't any.
Right.
So what we heard was that there was this subculture, alt-right, so to speak. It is called trads, from traditionals, right? Like elsewhere in the world, alt-right in India also actually attacks the mainstream right-wing politics, and they call them raitas. Raita, if you know, is a sideline that is served with biryani. Biryani is now associated with Muslims in India, and they say that, and of course it sounds a lot like a right wing, so raitas, right? But the whole idea is that they are somehow compromised, and they want to tolerate the Muslims in the society, and they want to actually create a Hindu Rashtra where minorities and the lower caste don't exist. They call themselves cauliflower farmers. And why is it? In 1989, in Bhagalpur, we know that some pogrom actually took place against Muslims when the dead bodies of Muslims were found buried under cauliflowers in the farms. So right now they actually want that to happen to the Muslims, and this is clear that this alt-right is inspired by the neo-Nazis in the West. They keep on using their language as well, and it has been going on for quite some time. And it seems that this ecosystem of hardliners all over the world is actually complemented by the Indian harder right as well.
Right.
And that might actually create more problem for them.
Right, and the parallels are so obvious, and yet, of course, they're ignored. Let us also welcome in the discussion Mr. Hamid Khan, who's a senior analyst. He's joined us online. Thank you very much for joining us on the debate. When we talk about the trads and the raitas, this, of course, is a demarcation between two extremist groups in the country. But then we see the overall situation in India, and of course, the Indian regime that currently exists. Is the sort of the different views of both these groups actually going to cause any sort of hindrance in the way that minorities or Muslims are treated? Is there any sort of possibility of an actual clash or such a difference of opinion that is actually counterproductive to what both the groups want to achieve?
Thank you very much, Sana. If you look into, as Pitafi Sahab have explained clearly, that this is all happening under the supervision of this government. I always believe that what has been done by this fascist Modi government in last 8-9 years, since 2014, it has encouraged Hindutva ideology and the right-wing people so much to go at any extreme. And whatever the actions are being going to taken, so-called actions by Indian government or anybody, they are not enough at all. They said that they're going to do it anything and they're going to talk to these app companies and everything. No, as the matter of fact, in one way or the other, the current regime is encouraging these brutal and immoral acts done by these public, but they are supported by the RSS ideology. That's the main thing we need to understand. That all whether it is the derogatory things against the Muslim women, whether it is lynching the Muslims, whether it is the crimes against all the minorities, whether it is insulting and humiliating the low scheduled caste Hindus there, it is all based on a certain ideology, and the world needs to understand that this ideology is gonna damage the entire region as well, one way or the other. And as you said, this the two different ideologies between writers and others, they are all, if you look into the exact situation, they are one way or the other going against the basics of any society. And the Indian society has become a very clearly fascist society, which has been led by this RSS ideology. And I mean, I can't believe it that when I came across some other news and some other reports where they are trying to force the villages to turn into Hinduism just because they are forcing them. I mean, it had never happened. I mean, in 21st century, they are trying to do something which was not even possible at 16th or 17th century. So
Right.
I
Mr.
believe
Hamid.
that now this is the time that world has to take actions against that. The big social media companies, whether apps supported iOS and other platforms, they all have to take some actions against that, and they
But
all
of
have
course,
to make
that
some
again is a
clear rules.
big question mark whether or not we could respond. Sure, Faisal.
Yeah, if I could add something to it, and earlier Brother Farrukh rightly mentioned that auction is going on of Muslim girls, not only Muslim girls, but of course women from the other classes of the lower classes of the Hindus as well, the Dalits I'm talking about. But there is another thing which we need to be worried about, and that these writers and trads, they are part of different groups of Telegram, different groups of they have their own groups on WhatsApp, and there are sources that were the part of these groups. They have recently highlighted many things on social media as well, that this is going on within these groups. And few of the things I want to highlight here: number one, they were claiming inside that even the Sikh, because they are Jats, and the Jat are actually the ones who became Jat from Shudra caste of the Hinduism. So what they tried to do in there was that don't consider them as Sikhs, they are the same Shudra for us now, and we should not be forgetting that all of these girls, they were actually brought to this world to facilitate the upper class of Hindus. This is the Sikh mentality they're having. And this is what they are doing to even Muslims and Sikhs and Dalits and everyone, and even the Christians as well. They consider them part of the Shudras and part of the Dalits and all, and they want to treat them the same way. And to me, I think this is very alarming. Another thing I wanted to highlight here, that there are obviously these groups, the members of these groups are from different parts of India, and they keep on highlighting anything goes around in their surroundings, and they name people, they name them, and whatever they are doing in the society, they name them, and then they want something to be done against them. So Brother Farrukh earlier, while talking that this would lead to a genocide, to me, I think this is the actual fact. This is going to take place, and this is the only way they are going to stage it through.
But unfortunately, as we see, and what we were saying earlier was, of course, the fact that the silence is there and it's deafening. And whether or not we keep on pointing out what's happening and the extent of it, the fact remains that the decisions that have been taken with regards to India have always been guided by other principles. Farrukh, I want to understand one thing. When we see the action that we say is being taken with regards to the makers of this app, this, of course, does not fit in with the way that the Modi regime has blatantly, or other instances in which people in India and influential leaders in India have blatantly discriminated against or indulged in different acts of violence against minorities or the Muslim community. Is this because they want to neutralize the way they respond? They don't really need to, since they don't really face any consequence. What really is the real reason behind this action?
Right. I think that is a very important question, because everybody keeps on thinking that perhaps because of the trads, there's going to be some kind of pressure on Modi government, and because of that they might actually lose elections in UP. This is an argument that has been advanced by some of the pundits. But I tell you about another fault line, and that is RSS, its head Mohan Bhagwat, and then of course Narendra Modi himself. Remember that Mohan Bhagwat's party or organization is known for its puppeteering of the BJP. For quite some time they have been pulling strings, right? Then they got themselves a Modi who has actually become, the tail is now wagging the dog. He has become too swollen headed, right? So to me, this is a very simple act of pressuring him, that if you are not going to be anti-minority, remember, there are certain aspects where there is total consensus, like abolishing or marginalizing the minorities, the lower castes, then attacking and trying to take over Pakistan and other neighboring countries. They have total consensus between Modi, RSS, other such elements. But then there is also this element of Modi's desire to present himself as a statesman. And when you try to do that, you have to moderate your stance a bit. And just to ensure that he doesn't actually become too lovey-dovey with the minorities, I think they have this pressure tactic, and these horrible creatures of darkness has actually started polluting the internet. They have started polluting all over the world. In the West, although the Western neo-Nazis actually believe that white race is leading and they should be actually taking care of the entire world, they must be oppressors. But this right-wing Hindutva band actually presents themselves that the upper caste Brahmins are basically Aryans. So they have an alliance and they should be actually taking care of the Abrahamic religions, and they should be controlling or marginalizing them. That's why I keep on telling everybody that today's anti-Semitism includes Islamophobia, anti-Christian sentiment as well, and they will stop at nothing until they have created that kind of right-wing neo-Nazi universal empire where they can actually do whatever they want to with their 200 million citizens, minorities, and their neighbors as well.
Right, Mr. Hamid, does this mean that perhaps that the fault lines that exist, all of these actually serve the purpose of creating such an empire? Because when there are such divides that actually exist, perhaps it's easier for people to associate themselves with one and not the other, and it actually emboldens and further strengthens the opinions or ideologies that people may have. So are these fault lines actually perhaps orchestrated by the Modi regime and then actually benefit the end result that they want to achieve?
Sana, actually, these fault lines in Modi's ideology, he's trying to complete his agenda. But as the matter of fact, it will fire back. All these actions are going to fire back one day or the other, because there is a limit for your atrocities. I always believe there is a limit of your unfair treatment. And on top of it, if you look into the entire situation, I am always emphasizing now that there has to be emergence of a counter-Muslim political leadership in India, where they can defend these poor minorities, especially the Muslim minorities, whether it is a matter of auctioning the women, whether it is exploiting the Muslim labor, exploiting the Muslims' employments. If I tell you a fact that when in 1947 at the division time, there was 30% Muslims were in the government jobs, and now there are less than 2% Muslims are in Indian government jobs. So this is a continuous exploitation for the last 75 years, and due to the lack of Muslim leadership in India, it has come to this point where that Hindutva ideology is on its peak. This RSS goons are attacking on Muslims openly, and this Modi is following his agenda with these all with his absolute pressure. But if you look into the entire situation, I believe that now there is a limit. World has to take action. World has to talk about it, and world has to take actions against these war
Absolutely, and,
crimes.
we hope that day comes soon, and much sooner than the price that seems to be for them to actually speak up and take a stance. Thank you very much, Mr. Hamid, for joining us and being with us on the debate and talking to us about this very important issue. Again, there are so many times that we have actually discussed the way that the situation keeps on deteriorating in India, but of course, at the end of the day, what we really hope to see is an actual consequence of the actions that the regime in India keeps on taking, and now that the public in India, a large part of also believes in, and this is a real threat. And as things or stances like these actually have a way of trickling down into other societies and into other humans as well. And perhaps this is something that's not limited to India, and maybe that is something, and that worry may be something that actually encourages us to take a step. That is, of course, the hope. Thank you so much for watching the debate. We'll see you tomorrow at 9.